Whitney Houston sold somewhere around 200 million records. She had the greatest voice of her generation, and almost nobody argued with that while she was alive. So here is something that should not make any sense at all. When Whitney Houston died, the amount of cash sitting in her bank account was about $40,000. Not 40 million, 40,000. The kind of balance a mid-level manager might have in savings. For years, the story we were all handed was a simple one. Whitney was a troubled genius who threw a fortune away on drugs and a bad marriage, and that was supposed to be the end of it. But that version quietly skips the only question that actually matters, the one people still ask under every video about her. Where did the money go? $250 million came in. So who is holding it now? We went through the contracts, the court filings, the divorce papers, and the deals that got signed after she was already in the ground. And what we found is that the people who got rich off Whitney Houston were, almost without exception, never Whitney Houston. We are going to lay this out in 7 parts. How she earned a fortune, how she somehow never owned the thing that created it, and who is quietly cashing the checks today. And in Part 5, we will show you the number her own record label, Arista Records, has never wanted printed anywhere. The roughly 20 million reasons she did not die rich. She died in the red. Part 1. To understand how strange the ending really is, we have to start at the very top, because the top was higher than most people remember. Whitney Houston grew up in Newark, New Jersey, and when her first album arrived in 1985, shepherded by her mentor and Arista Records founder Clive Davis, it went on to sell around 25 million copies. Her second album made her the first woman in history to debut at #1 on the album chart. And by 1987, at the absolute peak, she was out earning Michael Jackson. He brought in around $43 million that year. She brought in around 44. Think about that for a second. At the height of the biggest pop career on the planet, Whitney was beating him. Then came the film that turned her into something bigger than a singer. The Bodyguard, starring Whitney alongside Kevin Costner, grossed over $400 million around the world. And its soundtrack became, and still is, the best-selling movie soundtrack ever made, moving somewhere around 45 million copies. Whitney was smart enough to take a cut of that music on the back end, and by the time she died, that one soundtrack had earned her north of $33 million. She got paid $10 million for a single film, The Preacher's Wife, which made her the highest-paid black actress in Hollywood at the time. There were world tours pulling in tens of millions a year. There was even a private concert for the family of the Sultan of Brunei that reportedly paid her around $10 million for one night of singing. Add it all up across the whole career, and most estimates land in the same neighborhood. Whitney Houston grossed somewhere around $250 million. So how does a woman who earned that much die with $40,000 in the bank? To answer that, we have to look closely at what she was actually selling. And the first uncomfortable truth is this: she did not own most of it. Part 2. The single biggest song of Whitney's life was I Will Always Love You. It is still the best-selling single ever released by a woman. It played at weddings and funerals for the next 30 years. It is the song almost everyone pictures the moment you say her name. She did not write it. Dolly Parton did, all the way back in 1973. Parton wrote the song as a farewell to her business partner and mentor Porter Wagoner when she left his variety show to go solo. She owned every word of it. And in the music business, that one detail decides almost everything. When you write a song, you own the publishing, and the publishing is where the real long-term money lives. The person singing the song earns a recording royalty, and that royalty is usually smaller, and it gets swallowed up paying the record label back first. But the writer gets paid essentially forever. Every time that song is played, sold, streamed, or licensed, anywhere on Earth. So when Whitney's version exploded and sold tens of millions of copies, the songwriting money did not flow to Whitney. It flowed to Dolly. By most accounts, that one song earned Dolly Parton around $10 million in the 1990s alone, and a good deal more in the decades since. Dolly has been completely open about it. She has joked that when Whitney recorded the song, she suddenly got all the writing and publishing money, and that she used it to buy what she calls the house that Whitney built. An entire office property in Nashville, paid for by a song Whitney made famous and Dolly owned. This is not a knock on Dolly. She wrote it, so she earned it, and that is exactly how the system is supposed to work. But it is the first sign of a pattern that runs straight through this whole story. Whitney made the sound. Other people owned the asset. And the next time that pattern showed up, it did not cost her a single song. It cost her almost everything. Part 3. In August of 2001, Whitney Houston signed what was, at the time, the richest record deal in the history of the business. The headline number was $100 million. The press treated it like a coronation. The biggest female artist alive handed the biggest contract ever written by Arista Records, which was at that point owned by BMG, the Bertelsmann Music Group. And this is exactly where almost every other story about her gets it wrong. Because that $100 million was never a check. It was a ceiling. The way it actually worked is the important part. She got around $25 million up front. The rest, the other $75 million, was tied to future albums, 6 new studio albums, and a couple of greatest hits collections. She would only ever see that money if those albums sold, because the advances were what the industry calls recoupable. That is the most important word in this entire story. It means the label fronts you the money, and then quietly pays itself back out of your own sales before you ever see another dollar. And the timing could not have been worse. She signed right as the old record industry was falling off a cliff. Her label's parent company, BMG, was staring down a loss of around $150 million that very year. Then her next album badly underperformed. The sales the whole deal depended on simply never arrived. By the most cited accounts, out of that famous $100 million contract, Whitney only ever actually drew down around $40 million. And there is one more piece that nearly everyone leaves out. Through all of this, Whitney did not own her master recordings. Arista Records did. Those masters today sit in the catalog of RCA Records, Sony's label division that absorbed Arista, and are managed through Sony's Legacy Recordings unit. The actual Whitney Houston records, the ones that sold hundreds of millions of copies, were never hers to begin with. We will come back to who owns them today, because it matters enormously. For now, just hold on to this. The biggest deal in music history did not make her rich. It put her on a treadmill she could not step off. And the entire time she was running on it, the money was pouring out the other side just as fast. Part 4. So the money coming in was smaller and far more fragile than the headlines ever suggested. Now let us follow the money going out, because this is where it gets genuinely painful. Start with the obvious one: the drugs. Whitney later admitted on camera that at the worst of it, they were buying drugs in bulk, by the ounce and well beyond. This was not a weekend habit. It was a spending hole that ran for years. Then there was the family. Whitney was the bank for almost everyone around her. She put her own father, John Houston, on a salary that ran into the tens of thousands a year, and at one point, She lent him over $700,000 to redo his home. There was a large entourage, much of it family, all of it expensive. And in one of the saddest details of the whole story, her mentor Clive Davis, the man who discovered her and built Arista Records around her, reportedly ended up lending her well over $1 million of his own money just to cover rehab and debts. Then there was real estate, bleeding her quietly for years. She built a mansion in New Jersey for around $2.7 million. It was where she got married. After her death, after sitting unsold for years, that same property finally went for under $1 million, a loss of well over half its value. There were homes in Atlanta and Florida sold at losses too. And then there was the lawsuit that almost sounds made up. In 2002, Whitney's own father, John Houston, through his management company, sued her for $100 million, claiming she owed him for services that included helping land that giant record deal. The person pushing the suit hardest was a former associate who happened to be a convicted drug dealer out of Newark. John Houston died before any of it was resolved, and the case was eventually thrown out. But picture it for a moment. The same year her finances were quietly collapsing, she was being sued for a fortune by her own family. The money was leaking from every direction at once. Which finally brings us to the number we promised you, the one her label has never wanted you to see. Part 5. By the year 2007, Whitney was going through her divorce from Bobby Brown, and divorces come with something genuinely rare in the world of the rich and famous. Sworn financial disclosures, real numbers filed in a real court, under oath. What those filings showed stopped people cold. She listed around $4 million in debt, a stock portfolio worth a couple $100,000, a life insurance policy worth around $300,000, and in actual cash, in the bank, around $40,000. This was one of the most successful recording artists who had ever lived, and on paper, she was effectively broke. But the cash figure is not even the worst part. Remember that $100 million deal with Arista Records. And remember the word, recoupable. Because the albums never delivered, Whitney never came anywhere close to earning that contract out. By the most cited estimates, by the time she died, she did not simply have nothing left from it. She actually owed her label somewhere around $20 million in advances that were never paid back. Sit with that for a second. The woman with the greatest voice of her generation, who sold 200 million records, did not die $250 million rich. By the cold arithmetic of her own contracts, her net worth was effectively below zero. She died owing money to the very company that owned her recordings. Now, we do have to be fair here. Some of these figures are estimates, and Whitney's own mother, Cissy Houston, always pushed back hard on the idea that her daughter died broke. A divorce filing can also be written to make someone look poorer than they really are. But every reliable thread points in the same direction. The fortune was already gone. And then, on a February night in 2012, Whitney herself was gone too, which is exactly when the money story takes its strangest turn of all. Part 6. When Whitney Houston died in 2012, her estate was valued at around $20 million. Strikingly small for someone of her stature, but it was what remained. And almost immediately something happened that tells you everything about how this business really works. Her records started selling again. In the 9 months right after her death, her estate pulled in around $40 million, almost all of it from that sudden sales spike. In death, she instantly out-earned the final years of her own life. But who was all that money actually for? And here, the tragedy just keeps compounding. Whitney's will had been signed back in 1993, 1 month before her daughter, Bobby Christina, was even born. She never updated it. Not through her marriage, not through her divorce, not as her daughter grew up. So everything was left in a trust for Bobby Christina, to be paid out in stages as she got older. Bobby Brown, the ex-husband, was effectively cut out because the document still described a marriage that no longer existed. Bobby Christina received her first piece of that inheritance, around $2 million, when she turned 21. And then, in 2015, in a detail almost too cruel to be real, she was found unconscious in a bathtub, the same way her mother had been. She died at 22 years old. She left no will of her own. Her boyfriend at the time was later found liable in court for her death and ordered to pay more than $36 million. He never paid a cent of it, and he died a few years later himself. The inheritance passed back up to Whitney's mother, Whitney Houston, and her brothers. The money outlived almost everyone it was ever meant for. By this point, you would assume the Whitney Houston fortune was a closed and tragic chapter. It was not. It was about to be turned into a business. Part 7. This is the part of the story that almost nobody sees, because after she was gone, an entire empire got built on top of her. In 2019, the executor of Whitney's estate, her sister-in-law Pat Houston, made the deal that started it. She sold a company called Primary Wave a 50% stake in the estate's assets. And pay very close attention to what was actually sold, because this is the whole point. They did not sell the master recordings. They could not. Sony, through RCA Records and its Legacy Recordings catalog division, still owns those. What Primary Wave bought was half of the income streams, half of the royalty checks those recordings throw off, half of her name, her image, her likeness, and a share of her films. The price, by most reporting, was around $7 million, which valued the entire estate at about $14 million. Primary Wave has built a similar model with other legendary catalogs, including the Prince estate, making them one of the most aggressive players in the posthumous music business. Then watch what professionals do with an asset once they truly control it. Primary Wave has said publicly that it has since roughly quadrupled what the estate earns. They put together a major Hollywood biopic. They launched a Whitney Houston hologram show in Las Vegas, produced by Base Hologram, where a digital version of her performs for ticket buyers night after night. They blew the merchandise business wide open until it was reportedly bringing in around $400,000 every quarter, an increase of nearly 3,000%. There was a makeup line, a perfume, a Whitney digital collectible that sold for over $1 million. And then there is the detail that says all of it at once. They cut a deal to put Whitney Houston onto slot machines. So today, on casino floors in Las Vegas, Whitney Houston earns money every single time a stranger pulls the lever, because that license pays out more the more those machines get played. Put the two pictures side by side. In the most recent full years on record, her estate has been earning somewhere between $13 and $30 million a year. The dead Whitney Houston is now a more reliable, more profitable, and far better managed business than the living Whitney Houston was ever allowed to be. The voice that earned a fortune and could not hold on to a dime has become a machine that prints money on a schedule. For Sony and RCA Records, which own the master recordings. For Primary Wave, which owns half of everything else. And for the family that once stood around worrying about the vultures. So when somebody asks where Whitney Houston's money went, the honest answer is that most of it was never really hers to keep in the first place. She had the one thing no contract could ever manufacture: the voice. What she never had was ownership. And in the music business, ownership is the only thing that truly lasts. She made the sound the whole world fell in love with. Other people made very sure they owned it. If the real story of who gets rich off a legend is the kind of thing you want more of, you already know exactly where the rest of them are.